Most Christians believe that Romans 13 commands us to obey the government. But what happens when the government commands what God forbids, or forbids what God commands? The government is an institution that has been given to us by God, and it is a blessing for us. The problem with human government is it's made up of humans. You see, humans, we're fallible. We make mistakes, and our hearts don't always have the right motives, and we don't always desire what is pleasing to God. And so, in any human institution, there's going to be imperfections. And we come across an issue when we compare the human institution of government with the institution of God's law. You see, God's law is infallible. It doesn't make any mistakes. So sometimes when we have the human institution of the human government and the institution of God's law, they don't always perfectly coincide. Humans make mistakes, and sometimes we wander outside the bounds of what God has commanded of us. This creates a real issue for us. Inevitably, there is going to be a conflict between what the human government wants to do and what God has commanded us to do. If you want to understand what God's role for human government is, you don't really have to look any further than Romans 13. It gives us a nice snapshot description of what God has designed human government for. And in it, he's not established human government to have unlimited authority. He has a very limited amount of responsibilities for the human government. Specifically, the first priority of human government is to punish evildoers. You can see it right there in Romans chapter 13. That means when somebody transgresses God's law and they do it in a way that is harmful to society, the government is supposed to intervene to punish such evildoers. And in fact, it uses the terminology of bearing the sword because the ultimate power that human government has is the ability to take life away from somebody who has broken the law. But they're not just responsible to punish evildoers, but in doing so, it's human government's responsibility to protect the innocent. You see, in our countries, we have people who are strong. We also have the weak. There are vulnerable among us. And it's human government's responsibility to create a society so that those vulnerable are not being taken advantage of. So human government has been instituted by God to uphold justice so that society can be free and society can flourish. God's given the human governments the power of the sword to make sure that this order is established. But it's limited in its jurisdiction. It's not an unlimited amount of power that they're given. And these parameters that God sets for human government are to direct it for what it's supposed to do, not for what it's permitted to do. God is giving a direction to governments, what you are there for and what their purpose is to serve. It's not the government's job to redefine what their version of morality is. The problems arise when the government starts overstepping its jurisdiction and starts claiming authority that God has never given it. Let's talk about 4 ways that obedience to the government can actually be disobedience to God. Firstly, when human governments require lying or they start redefining morality. You see, God is one who defines morality, and he's required of us truth. And yet when human governments start establishing their own version of morality, the first thing they start to do is that they require us to affirm it. They require us to agree with their conclusions. And this is wrong. When the government is requiring the people to say what is evil is good, or to say what is good is evil, when the government is compelling us to say things that do not agree with God, and we do it, then we are being complicit in disobeying God. You see, God is the one who set the standard of truth, and we must represent that standard, and we must speak the truth. If the government is requiring us to agree to certain things, to state certain things, to speak and to not speak certain things, and it disagrees with God, then we are disobeying him. Now, unfortunately, the temptation to do this can be very subtle. It can be in small areas. It can be small things. Leave this little part out or include this little thing. It doesn't seem like a big deal at first, but it's a slippery slope when we allow the government to dictate what we can and cannot say. No human law can make a lie become truth. Only God determines that. Now, the second area where obeying the government might be disobeying God is when we allow the government to become the absolute authority over the home. You see, the home was created as a foundational authority structure for society. And government is actually created to serve the home. So when government starts stepping into the home and telling the home what it can and cannot do in its own sphere of authority, then it is sin if we listen to it. The areas of authority that are granted to the home are education and the economy of the home, raising children to fear and to worship the Lord. When the state gets involved with education, moral formation, and the conscience of the children in our household or our household in general, then we are actually disobeying God. God ordained mothers and fathers in the house for this primary role. They are the heads of the houses. The third area in which obeying the government might be disobeying God is in our bodily autonomy. You see, God created the human being to be responsible for your own body. Now, bodily autonomy doesn't mean you get to do whatever you want with your body. Don't misunderstand me. God actually has set forward for us standards on how we are to conduct our own bodies. But it's not the government's job to enforce that. It's God's job, and it's our job. You see, I am responsible to take care of my body and to use my body in a way that pleases God. It's not the government's responsibility to do that. Now, if I use my body in a way that hurts another person, then of course the government is going to get involved and is going to make sure that I receive the punishment due to me, because that's their authority. But I am the one responsible for my own body. When the government steps in telling you what you can and cannot do with your body, then they tread dangerously into the territory of causing you to disobey God. We have many programs, at least here in Canada, where the government is already doing this. From medical assistance in dying to abortion, what we see is the government getting involved with a moral stance to take away the life of innocent people. All of this is the government stepping out of bounds from what they're authorized to do. It's the government's job to punish evildoers, not to kill innocent people. When we go along with this, when we partake in these same activities that the government is pushing, then we are sinning. All of our doctors and our nurses who are performing these operations, they are sinning against God. And when we allow these things to take place and we give our stamp of approval, we are also complicit with it as well. You see, human beings bear the image of God. When Jesus was speaking with his disciples and the Pharisees questioned him about, should he pay taxes to Caesar? Jesus said, give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, but give to God the things that are God's. And the thing that is God's is our body. I am made in the image of God. When you look at me or I look at you, I see somebody who is in the image of God. I see an imprint of God. And so God is one who owns us. We belong to him. And therefore, we don't get to decide whether to end our own lives on our own. The government doesn't get to decide whether to end my life. I am responsible to God to take care of the life that God has given me and to honor him with it. Now, the fourth area in which obeying the government might be disobeying God is in regards to worship. When the government steps in to regulate how we worship. This is sin. You see, worship is designed to be led by the elders of the church, and it's designed to be the people of God coming together. It is a separate authority structure that the government doesn't have authority over. We have protections in our countries, in Canada and in the United States, for religious worship, for churches. And these aren't things that are granted by the government. They're actually things that are granted by God. The government doesn't give us permission to worship. Worship isn't a privilege. Worship is a right. The government has no authority to take these things away. And they have no authority to dictate and to guide how those things take place. When the government starts setting forward the doctrines and the teachings that the church can and cannot teach, they have stepped out of bounds of what they're supposed to do. And when we listen to it, we are sinning. Our world is changing very quickly, and the state is increasingly putting the pressure on us. Here in Canada, we in the church are facing immense pressure by the government, who's telling us that the things we are teaching are unsafe, they're dangerous, that they're hateful, when we are just teaching the historic Christian doctrines. You see, here's the thing. The government doesn't get to determine what is hateful and what is unsafe in the church. This is God's law. This is God's word. And we must trust him and obey him. The church is not a domain that the government has authority over. When the state claims authority over truth, your body, worship, and the family, it's no longer acting as a servant of God, but as a rival God. Which of these areas do you think the government is most overstepping today? Truth, family, body, or worship? Let me know in the comments below. I read them and it helps shape future videos. In the Old Testament, God's people Israel were carried off into exile because of their sin, and God raised up a prophet among them named Daniel. And while they were carried off into exile, Daniel faced a test. King Darius signed a decree requiring that all people would pray to him only for 30 days. And Daniel had a choice to make. Will I pray to my God who I know I should pray to and I pray to every day? Or do I pray to King Darius just so that I can save my own skin? Daniel chose to do what was right. He went into his room like he had always done, and he prayed to the Lord anyway. This story isn't even really a story about prayer. It's showing us that Daniel refused to do what was evil, even though the government was requiring it of him. He just did what he'd always done. He quietly refused to comply. Daniel didn't rebel violently. You see, our weapons of our warfare as Christians, they're not carnal. There's a time for violence. There's a time for protecting the ones you love. But here was not that case. Daniel just stood up, he prayed, and he trusted God. You see, God might protect him. God might let him suffer the consequences. But Daniel's job was to honor God through it all. Daniel trusted in the power of God, that God is able to change the heart of the king, and God is able to protect him. And in the end, Daniel did get thrown to the lions, but God protected him in the lion's den. Daniel obeyed God, and he accepted the consequences, whatever they would be. The issue was never prayer. It was worship. When government requires what belongs to God, obedience becomes idolatry. It's important to remember that human governments have real authority, that God really has endowed them with authority, and he approves of the authority that they wield. It's important that we approach human government with fear and trembling, knowing that if we break the law, we will suffer the consequences. But human government's authority isn't total and infallible. They have a limited jurisdiction. They have a limited purpose. Just like fathers and parents in houses, just like elders in churches, they have a limited scope of what they're supposed to do. But God's authority is absolute. In God's moral law, it applies in all situations. God is above all things, and he must be submitted to, higher and more important than every other human authority. Christians are not called to rebel against authority. We're called to refuse idolatry, even when it's legalized. In the next video, we'll talk about whether it's ever okay for Christians to break the law. If you like this video, though, leave a comment below and like and subscribe to see more content like this.